in my review of my Wingsung 601A Lake Blue, I mentioned that this was a replacement for my 601A in this red color that I gifted my wife. Now, after she had been writing with this for a while, the nib sprung on her. I had purchased a replacement nib for this when I bought this pen, just in case, and they were available and cheap. So what I did was, and this is about a year ago, I replaced that nib with this one, and now it writes fine for her. But when I got this pen, as you saw in the review last Wednesday, the nib on it was not satisfactory at all. In fact, I think it was an extra fine and not a fine. The nibs aren't marked, so it's hard to tell. But what I did was I took and this is the nib that was on this pen. And maybe you can see that there's very little tipping material on that nib at all. And so I believe that's an extra fine. It was also very scratchy, very, very stiff. And I micromeshed the hell out of it and still wasn't pleased with it. So I decided to go back to the nib that was on my wife's original 601A and see if I could repair it. So this is the nib that came off that pen that was sprung, and I repaired it and replaced it on this pen and took the pen apart to do that. So I thought I'd do a video and recreate what I did to this pen to make it write decently, and it actually writes decently now. So what I'm going to do is to replace the nib on this pen with nothing but this. Some silicone grease, the little tool that I bought with this pen to disassemble the pump. So first off, I'll show you what I did to fix the sprung nib. So what I did was I took one of my Grumbacher watercolor paintbrushes, and I took the other end. It just so happened that the nib fit right over the end of that brush. So I'm going to try to get in close here to show you what I did to unspring this nib. So with the nib firmly on the end of this, which just gives me a little bit more leverage, what I did was I pressed it into a hard surface so that it kind of crossed there. You can see it crossing itself there, and just a little bit of pressure, and just held it there for about 30 seconds, and then let it spring back. And then I did it to the other side as well, opposite direction. See a little bit how I'm crossing those tines and pressing them together. And then once I've got that gap closed up, I look at the end of the nib to see whether it's aligned now or not, or whether I've misaligned it, and then I just press the one tine up or the other tine down to see whether I can get them aligned again. So the idea is to close that slit. Now this one was already closed, but the one that was sprung was wide open and I could see white. I'd put white cloth behind it and I could see white light through that slit. You can see just a little bit, and this is now touching. So once I got the slit so that the two tines were touching here and there was a gap back here, and they were fairly aligned, then I went about the process of disassembling the pen and reinstalling the new nib. We'll do that right now. So I did show how to disassemble the 601A in my video review, but let's do it again. I've already cleaned this pen out of ink. We take the blind cap off, and then we take our tool and we put it over that nut. Now that has got a hex on there, so if you've got a hex wrench of that size, which is 5.25 millimeters, you can put that on that nut as well, but this makes it really, really easy. And we unscrew the piston. And we can take that piston out, set it aside. Then what we want to do is take this part, the section and the barrel apart, and that unscrews. And you see there's a silicone O-ring right there. That's very important. And these threads that we will grease up. And here you see the breather tube from the inside feed. And now I'm going to take the nib off of that little nose cone, which will remove the feed as well. I'm going to put a little piece of rubber matting around that to get a good grip. And now when I did this the first time, it was very, very difficult to unscrew that. And you think you're going to break it, but there's a little bit, I think the factory puts a little bit of Teflon on there or some kind of very light glue, because once I broke the seal, it unscrewed easily and I was able to pull the nib off and I was able to take the feed out. So there are your parts. Here's your feed and your nib. I want to make sure I get the right nib. Those tines are actually touching each other. A little bit of a gap, and they are aligned fairly nicely. I had the pen working nicely, and I'm risking screwing this up. But once you've got this apart, and you've got the nib off, so you can fit that feed back into the nose cone, drop the nib on top of it. So now that nib is on there tight, and you can see that the feed and the nib are misaligned. And so I'm going to take note of how much, and I'm just going to twist that feed back a little bit. I just needed to twist back just a bit. I sort of make note of where the center of that is in those notches. Put it back on. Screw the nib down, and voila, it's attached. So now we're going to reattach the barrel, but first I'm going to apply a little bit of the supplied silicone grease. A little bit up there, just to that O-ring. And then we take the nose cone, screw the barrel down. So that's tight. That's where some ink leaks happen, so that's very important to keep that sealed. Now we're going to put a little bit of grease on our piston. These do have a tendency to stick, so getting the grease on there is important. And we insert that. Tool on, just so it's snug. Then we're ready to fill it up with ink again. I turn the pen upside down so I can see that filler hole, and put it in at a bit of an angle into my ink and pump it 2 or 3 times until I run out of air bubbles. And that should be a fairly full fill. Put our end cap on, and we're ready to write. Much better. Nice and wet, fairly smooth. Again, a very stiff nib, but this is much more acceptable now. So this was a quickie, but if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And that just leaves it for me to say again, thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote. Yay.
I made this.